My name is Adrian. I'm 32 years old, and let me be the first to tell you, money is a great insulator, but it's not a magic shield. It can't protect you from the specific, gut-wrenching brand of drama that only a family can provide. I learned this not in a boardroom, but in my parents' living room on a rainy Thursday evening, a setting that should have felt like a sanctuary but had always felt more like a courtroom. I'd been working since I was 18. I walked away from a business degree after my first year, a decision my parents treated not as a personal choice, but as a personal affront. I can still see my mother, her hand wrapped around a ceramic mug, stirring her coffee with a slow, deliberate clink that sounded like a verdict. "You'll never amount to anything without a degree, Adrian." She said it like she was reading from a script, one written by a generation that believed a framed piece of paper was the only key to a stable life. My dad, sitting in his worn armchair, just grunted. That grunt was his native language when it came to me, a sound of dismissal, of quiet, profound disappointment. They didn't know I'd already launched my first online store, a niche e-commerce site I built during late nights in my dorm room. To them, I was just a reckless, naive kid who didn't want to do the real work of getting a degree and climbing a corporate ladder. We were never what you'd call a close-knit family. My parents were architects of appearances. Worth was measured by titles, by the car you drove, by the stories you could tell at a country club brunch. My older sister, Lily, was their masterpiece. A corporate lawyer with a wardrobe of sharp, expensive suits and a collection of handbags that probably cost more than my first year's rent. She had a cold, calculated confidence that could freeze a room. She was the success story they paraded before relatives and friends. I was the cautionary tale they whispered about. For years, I endured the family dinners. I'd sit at their mahogany table, the scent of roasted chicken and subtle judgment hanging in the air. "Still doing that little internet thing?" my dad would ask, chuckling as if I were still trading baseball cards. Lily would give me a thin, polite smile from across the table. "You know, it's never too late to go back to school, Adrian. Get a real job." The digs were always disguised as concern, a thin veneer over their sheer disbelief in my choices. And for years, I let it slide. What was the point of defending myself? Building a business from the ground up consumes every ounce of your energy, your focus, your soul. I didn't have anything left over to prove myself to people who had already decided I was a failure. So, I built my life in silence. I didn't brag when I bought my first house outright at 27. I didn't mention the international first-class flights or the investment portfolios that were quietly compounding. I just smiled, nodded, and absorbed their condescension, then went home to a life they couldn't even imagine. The breaking point came with a simple text from my mom. "Can you stop by after work? We need your help with something." It was raining that evening, a steady, gloomy downpour that matched my mood as I pulled up to their familiar house. The lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow that I knew was deceptive. When I walked in, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. My dad was pacing in the living room, wearing a path in the oriental rug. Lily was perched on the edge of the sofa, swirling a glass of red wine, a faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips. My mom stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like a shield. "Adrian," my dad began, stopping his pacing to face me. "We've been talking. You're 32 years old. It's clear this online nonsense isn't going anywhere. You've had enough time to play at this, but you're still wasting your potential." I felt my jaw tighten, a familiar ache settling in. "What exactly are you getting at, Dad?" He pointed a finger toward the front door, his voice rising. "You've been living in that same apartment for years. You're still coming here, asking for help with small things. We can't keep enabling you, son. It has to stop." I was genuinely baffled. "Enabling me? I have never, not once, asked you for money. Not a single cent." Lily let out a short, derisive laugh. "Oh, come on, Adrian. Don't be pathetic. You've been coasting for years. You think anyone actually believes you're making a living off your little hobby? It's sad, honestly." My mom stepped forward, her voice sharp and final. "We've decided it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. For real. No more coming here when you need help, No more expecting us to bail you out. I stared at them, these three people who shared my DNA, and felt a cold void open up in my chest. I don't need you to bail me out. I'm doing just fine. If you're doing so fine, my dad barked, his face flushing, then you can prove it by surviving without our help at all. In fact, you can leave now. Go figure it out. Maybe living in the streets for a bit will finally wake you up. The room fell silent, the only sound the relentless drumming of rain against the window panes. I looked at Lily, who took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes bright with vindication. The heat of a lifetime of injustice rose in my chest, but I forced it down. I forced myself to be calm. They thought this was their grand, tough love intervention. They were waiting for me to break, to plead, to promise I'd finally get a real job. They had no idea that the apartment they mocked was a penthouse with a skyline view. They didn't know the used car I drove was one of 3 in my garage. They were so sure of my failure that the truth was an impossibility to them. I picked up my jacket from the back of the armchair and slipped it on slowly, deliberately. "All right," I said, my voice soft, almost a whisper. A strange, detached smile touched my lips. "If that's what you want." My mom opened her mouth, no doubt to add one last, cutting remark, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked out, closing the front door behind me with a quiet, definitive click. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car, the rain blurring the world outside, I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was amused. A cold, clear amusement. They had just kicked out their financial safety net, and they were too blind to see it. As I drove off into the stormy night, I knew, with absolute certainty, that in a few weeks, the flawless, fragile world they had built was going to shatter. And I was going to be the one holding the hammer. The first week was eerily quiet. My phone didn't ring. No texts asking if I was okay, no voicemails filled with regret. It was a silence that spoke volumes. They had truly written me off. I threw myself into my work, conducting meetings from my home office. A spacious, serene room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the heart of the city. That view was my daily reminder. I had built this. The failure. By the second week, the narrative began to leak back to me through the grapevine. My cousin Jacob, a decent guy who'd always been the family's quiet observer, texted me. "Jacob, hey man, heard some weird stuff at dinner tonight. Your mom was telling people you're basically homeless now. Said you'd probably come crawling back soon. Jacob, also, Lily made a joke about maybe letting you do odd jobs at her firm. She said, you'd look good fetching coffee." I stared at the screen, the words, "fetching coffee," burning into my retinas. It wasn't the insult that stung. It was the sheer, unadulterated pettiness. They weren't just moving on. They were actively building my tombstone and dancing on the grave. The third week, I decided to see the show for myself. Jacob mentioned the Sunday dinners had become a weekly celebration of my absence. I drove over, not in my usual sedan, but in the low-slung silver coupe they'd never seen. I parked down the street and watched them through the dining room window. There they were, my parents and Lily, laughing, raising glasses of wine. I could almost hear the script, Lily's latest triumph, my parents' adoration, and the obligatory, sorrowful sigh about their wayward son. Watching them, something in me solidified. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about justice. The final straw came 2 days later. My mom called, her voice light and artificially sweet. "Adrian, darling, your father and I need help moving some old furniture next weekend. Since you've got nothing else going on, you should have the time." I had to bite my cheek. "Sorry, I'm busy." She sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. "Busy with what?" "Work." I heard her soft, knowing laugh. It was a sound that had once made me feel small. Now, it just sounded foolish. "Of course. Your business. Well, try to make time for family, okay? You might need us someday." That was the moment it crystallized. They genuinely saw themselves as my saviors, the safety net I would inevitably fall into. The condescension was so deep, so ingrained, they couldn't even conceive of a reality where I was the one holding the net. I decided then to play along. Let them stack their insults, layer on their assumptions. The higher they built their tower of superiority, the harder it would fall. The true, stomach-churning low came in the 4th week. An email from my bank flagged unusual activity on an old account, a joint savings account from my teen years I'd forgotten to close. 2 withdrawals, over $7,000 each, made from a branch near my parents' house. A phone call to the bank confirmed it. My mother had walked in, claimed I'd authorized her to access the funds for a family emergency, and walked out with a cashier's check. Twice. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just condescension, this was theft. I called Jacob, my voice tight. "You are not going to believe this." There was a long pause. "Adrian, I think I know where that money went. Lily just put a down payment on a new luxury SUV. She was bragging that it was a gift from the family for all her hard work." The ice that flooded my veins wasn't anger. It was something colder, clear. They hadn't just taken my money, they had used it as a reward for the daughter who played by their rules. They had stolen from the son they saw as a failure to further elevate the daughter they worshipped. That night, I drove to their house and parked across the street. Inside, through the picture window, I saw them. Lily was holding up a set of car keys, jingling them like a trophy. My mom was taking a picture, no doubt for social media. My dad was beaming, clapping Lily on the back. They were celebrating. With my money. I sat there in the dark for a long time, watching the scene play out like a sickening sitcom. And as I watched, the last fragile thread of loyalty, the one that had somehow survived all the dinners and the dismissals, finally snapped. It was a clean, quiet break. There was no going back. Later, a text from my mom confirmed their breathtaking audacity. "Hope you're not upset about the savings account. It was just sitting there, and your sister needed help. You'll make more money someday. Family comes first." No apology. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just a smug, patronizing justification. I didn't reply. There were no words left. Only action. The air in my life changed after that. It became heavier, charged with a purpose that was both grim and focused. I wasn't just a hurt son anymore, I was a strategist. I pulled back from social engagements, not out of depression, but to plan. I had my lawyer lock down every asset, every account. I hired a discreet financial investigator to compile a full picture of my family's finances. I needed to understand their weaknesses. The reports that came back were illuminating. My parents' retirement was looking precarious. Lily, despite her high salary, was drowning in debt from luxury handbags and bad investments. The SUV was just the tip of the iceberg. But the most interesting piece of information was about my father. He had personally guaranteed a loan for a small, struggling property development company. It was about 3 months from collapse, and when it fell, he would be personally liable for a massive 6-figure sum. A plan began to form, not of blunt revenge, but of poetic justice. I wouldn't destroy them. I would simply let their own choices undo them, and I would be standing there when it happened, not as a victim, but as an unmovable force. An opportunity soon fell into my lap. A real estate investment firm I worked with was acquiring distressed assets. On their list was a block of half-finished townhouses. The owner? My father's failing company. I quietly positioned myself so that when the default happened, I could acquire the entire project through the firm. It would be a clean, smart business move on paper. In reality, it would be me taking ownership of my father's biggest failure. While these wheels were in motion, I allowed my name to drift back into their world in a new way. I attended high-level investor galas and tech summits. I greenlit international expansions for my companies. I wanted the rumors to reach them, whispers of my success that would contradict their carefully constructed narrative of my failure. The final piece clicked into place when a prominent business magazine reached out. They wanted to feature me in a spread about underestimated entrepreneurs. I agreed, on the condition that the issue dropped the same month my father's investment was set to implode. The dominoes were lined up. All I had to do was wait. The month arrived. The magazine hit the stands on a Monday. My face was on the cover. The headline was impossible to miss. My phone exploded with congratulations. And right on cue, a text from my mother. "Adrian, we saw the magazine. We had no idea things had gotten this big for you. We're so proud. Proud. The word was so hollow, so insultingly late, it was almost funny. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, as predicted, my father's company defaulted. The bank seized the assets, and my investment firm swept in. I was now the legal owner of the development my father had staked his future on. I waited a few days for the dust to settle in their minds, for the panic to set in. Then, I had my assistant book a table at an opulent downtown restaurant and extend an invitation to my family to discuss a business opportunity. Their eagerness was palpable. They arrived dressed in their best, all strained smiles and newfound respect. My mother actually hugged me. My father shook my hand with a firm, businessman's grip. Lily was sickeningly sweet. We made small talk over appetizers, the chandeliers above us casting a soft, expensive light. Halfway through the main course, I slid the folder across the white tablecloth. My father opened it, his smile fading as he read. Confusion, then dawning horror, washed over his face. This is our property, he stammered. Correction, I said, my voice calm and even. It was your property. It's mine now. The silence that followed was deafening. I explained it dispassionately, like a news report. The default. The bank's actions. My acquisition. I was a surgeon, and this was my procedure. Brian, how could you? My mother gasped, her face flushed with shame and anger. I met her gaze, my own steady. How could I? The same way you could walk into my bank and take $15,000 without asking. The same way you gave it to Lily for a down payment on her SUV. The same way you kicked me out and told everyone I was living in my car. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping. I just learned from the best. My father looked shrunken in his chair. Lily stared at her plate, her jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. The difference, I continued, is that I didn't have to lie or steal. I played the long game. And when this development turns a profit, and it will, not a single cent will have your name on it. I let the silence hang there, let the weight of it crush them. I finished my meal, placed my napkin on the table and stood. I threw a few bills onto the table to cover the bill. Enjoy your evening, I said, my tone polite, almost conversational. Oh, and don't worry about the construction crew. I've already assured them their jobs are safe. It's just yours that are obsolete. And with that, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own arrogance. The warm, fancy air of the place no longer felt inviting. It felt like a tomb for the relationship we never really had. The fallout was swift and merciless. My father retreated from public life, humiliated. My mother's frantic calls to fix the situation only spread the news further. The people they had tried so hard to impress now knew that the son they dismissed now held the deed to their failure. Lily, without my parents' financial support, had to downgrade her car and eventually put her condo on the market. The image she had so carefully curated began to crumble. They tried to reach out a few times, pleading texts, strained voicemails about family and forgiveness. I ignored them all. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about closure. They had shown me who they were when they had all the power. I had simply believed them. Months later, the townhouses sold out. The profit was substantial. Sometimes I drive through the quiet, well-kept streets, watching families live their lives in homes that were, in a roundabout way, built from the ashes of my family's betrayal. It was a satisfying feeling, but not a triumphant one. It was a quiet, solid peace. The last communication I received from my mother was a short, brittle email. You've changed. I read it once, then closed the tab. She was wrong. I hadn't changed. I had simply finally and completely become myself. I had stopped accepting the role they had written for me in their narrow, status-obsessed play. And as I stood on my balcony that night, the endless city lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars below me, I realized the true victory. It wasn't in the acquisition or the magazine spread. It was in the quiet knowledge that I was free. They had told me to go live in the streets. Instead, I had bought the whole block. And I was finally, irrevocably home.